Thank you so much for joining me for another message from the wilderness. I hope what I have to say today will be edifying and educational. A story that has gained a lot of media attention lately is the gift of a Boeing 747 aircraft to the Trump administration by the government of Qatar. President Trump has said that this $400 million luxury plane will be used as the new Air Force One. However, upgrading it to meet security, communication, and other necessary standards could take years and may cost as much as $1 billion of taxpayer money. President Trump has expressed his intention to use the plane following his administration. Constitutionally, the gift appears to violate the Foreign Emoluments Clause found in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 of the Constitution. It reads, quote, "No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States, and no person holding any office of profit under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept of any present emolument, office, or title of any kind whatsoever from any king, prince, or foreign state." End of quote. Administration officials, including Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi, maintain that due to the specifics of the transaction, the gift does not violate the Foreign Emoluments Clause or any other policy or regulation. Technically, they argue, the plane is a gift to the Department of Defense. However, nearly all constitutional experts in the U.S. appear to concur that this gift and all others like it do violate the intent of the Foreign Emoluments Clause. Legal specificity aside, many have the impression that this exchange is an egregious example of trading public trust for personal benefit. The practice of using gifts to gain influence is a problem as old as governments have existed. That there may be some legal way to avoid the intent of the Foreign Emoluments Clause reminds us that the law is an inadequate ethical filter. The law can keep some impurities out of our body politic, but ultimately a finer filter is needed. Our public ethics depend upon the inner moral compass of individuals in our body politic. If the inner sense of right and wrong is not tightly woven, legal provisions notwithstanding, our society's ability to avoid contamination is limited. Our nation's founders fretted about this. Michael Waterman, writing for the Brennan Center for Justice on May 14, 2025, remarked, quote, "The founders were very concerned about an individual using the power of the presidency to enrich themselves and their family members. They focused sharply on the risk of corruption and were well aware of the myriad ways the system could be abused. And they were especially worried that foreign governments could influence American presidents." End of quote. We can find evidence of this in the Federalist Papers. One statement directed clearly toward the dangers of foreign influence in our government is found in Federalist Paper 22, authored by Alexander Hamilton. He wrote, quote, "In republics, persons elevated from the mass of the community by the suffrages of their fellow citizens to stations of great preeminence and power may find compensations for betraying their trust. History furnishes us with many mortifying examples of the prevalency of foreign corruption in republican governments." End of quote. Some may believe that the gift came with no expectation of return, yet this perception runs counter to important cultural norms in the Arab world. In this region, the cultural phenomenon of wasta is strong. Wasta is the tradition of giving gifts in exchange for influence in government and in business. One researcher concluded that in the Arab world, quote, "with the right connections, it is said that wasta can solve almost any problem." End of quote. There are abundant reasons to be concerned that the gift will come with strings attached, which may not be consistent with the will of the governed. None of us should be surprised by this. The U.S. Office of Government Ethics provides training to federal employees in the executive branch. This organization circulates a document known as 14 Principles of Ethical Conduct. 3 of these principles are used here for emphasis. Principle number 1. Public service is a public trust, requiring employees to place loyalty to the Constitution, the laws, and ethical principles above private gain. Principle 7. Employees shall not use public office for private gain. And Principle 14. Employees shall endeavor to avoid any actions creating the appearance that they are violating the law or the ethical standards set forth in this part. Whether particular circumstances create an appearance that the law or these standards have been violated shall be determined from the perspective of a reasonable person with knowledge of the relevant facts. Principle 14 establishes the higher standard that ought to apply to those who serve us in public positions. Even the appearance of a violation of the law or of generally accepted ethical principles is to be avoided, just the appearance. And rather than hiding behind legal wordsmithing, the standard is what a reasonable person would assume when a questionable action occurs. The gift of a luxury aircraft to a reasonable person violates ethical principles, even if a legal loophole can be found to justify the gift. So, what do we do? How can we reduce such gross lapses in ethics? Robert Roberts addressed this question in an article he published in 2024 for the American Society for Public Administration. Roberts concluded that improvements in ethics would require an all-hands-on-deck approach. He wrote, quote, "During an era when democratic institutions in the United States and worldwide faced profound challenges, public integrity management must evolve to use all available tools to protect the legitimacy of actions taken by honorable public servants. This includes embracing external and internal constraints on public servants. Recent history makes clear that dark times have descended on democratic institutions within the United States and around the world." End of quote. An external constraint would be formal laws and policies designed to prevent unethical behavior. But, as the Qatar case teaches us, even the Constitution itself is not sufficient for preventing clear ethical lapses. Thus, Roberts argues for internal controls as well. This means frequent ethical training, such as that provided by the U.S. Office of Government Ethics, as well as by hiring and electing officials who have demonstrated trustworthiness time and time again. Public trust used to be taught and valued more than it is now. I am not naive enough to believe we have always lived up to what we have been taught, but we did try. As I look beyond our current degenerative ethical state to what I wish we could be, I think going back to the past is a great way to see our way forward. I'd like to share a few examples of what we used to teach about protecting public trust. A cherished book in my personal library is a 1954 copy of Handbook for Boys, published by the Boy Scouts of America. It was owned by my father, and his signature is on the first page. On page 28 of that handbook, we read about the importance of being trustworthy. Quote, "Our whole world is based on trusting other people. You trust the storekeeper from whom you buy your baseball mitt to sell you a good one, and the manufacturer who made it to use honest materials. You trust the postal department when you put a stamp on a letter to deliver it for you. You trust the plumber who mends the kitchen sink to do a good job. Sometimes people fail in their trust, but they live up to it more often. Unless we trusted people, the whole machinery of living would break down. End of quote. Can you imagine how different our society would be if government and business positions were staffed by people who had training like this, and more importantly, who were deeply converting to living in such a noble way? I can. And I'm not sure why so many of us seem willing to accept something far inferior. Going back a bit further, we remember stories told about President Abraham Lincoln. William J. Bennett, who served as the Secretary of Education during the Reagan administration, compiled a wonderful book titled The Book of Virtues, a Treasury of Great Moral Stories. It was published in 1993. In his book, Bennett shares some stories about President Lincoln. Here's one from President Lincoln's younger days that I particularly like, having worked in retail myself. Quote, "One day, a woman came into the store and purchased sundry articles. They footed up $2.0625, or the young clerk, Abraham Lincoln, thought they did. The bill was paid, and the woman was entirely satisfied. But the young storekeeper, not feeling quite sure as to the accuracy of his calculation, added up the items once more. To his dismay, he found that the sum total should have been but $2. I've made her pay 6.25 too much, said Abe, disturbed. It was a trifle, and many clerks would have dismissed it as such. But Abe was too conscientious for that. The money must be paid back, he decided. This would have been easy enough had the woman lived just round the corner, but, as the young man knew, she lived between 2 and 3 miles away. This, however, did not alter the matter. It was night, but he closed and locked the store and walked to the residence of his customer. Arrived there, he explained the matter, and paid over the 6.25 and returned satisfied. I think my young readers will begin to see that the name so often given in later times to President Lincoln of Honest Abe was well deserved. A man who begins by strict honesty in his youth is not likely to change as he grows older, and mercantile honesty is some guarantee of political honesty." End of quote. What an important story to preserve and to share. I think Abraham Lincoln and I would have seen the world in a similar fashion had we been contemporaries. We just can't understand the logic, the mentality, the ethical twists and knots that can be tied in places like D.C. When they say no laws were broken by accepting a $400 million plane, people like us, well, we just can't help but believe they're hiding their follies under a covering of cheesecloth. We can see what's really there. Oh yes. Going further back, I'd like to close by referring to a movie produced in 1966 titled A Man for All Seasons. The setting took place in the 1500s in England. The plot focuses on King Henry VIII's desire to have his marriage to Catherine of Aragon annulled so that he could marry Mary Boleyn. Pope Clement VII disapproved of the annulment, but Henry VIII was determined to move ahead anyway, and he wanted moral justification for doing so. Among the members of Parliament he most wanted to persuade was Sir Thomas More, who was deeply respected in England for his wisdom, ability to communicate, and his integrity. But Sir Thomas More would not go against the teachings of his faith. He could not be persuaded to support Henry VIII in his determination. He considered himself to be bound by sacred oaths he had made prior to the conflict. At one point in the movie, Sir Thomas More is questioned by his daughter Meg about his unwillingness to support the king. Meg was understandably afraid for her father's life, but this was his reply to her, quote, "When a man takes an oath, Meg, he's holding his own self in his own hands like water. And if he opens his fingers, then he needn't hope to find himself again. Some men aren't capable of this, but I'd be loath to think your father one of them. End of quote. Sir Thomas More was in fact executed in 1535 by Henry VIII. Our president, our representatives, our senators, and so many others in public service have made an oath to protect and defend our Constitution. That oath should matter to them, and it should matter to all of us also. Those who have decided on weak support to open their fingers are letting themselves fall, and all the gifts, presents, and titles they may be given in exchange will not allow them to recover their integrity nor their self-respect. At least, that's the way I see it. Until next time, I want to wish you all the best from the wilderness.